Anyway, our last day's alert is Israel and its neighbors. And I say that because if anybody watched the first foreign leader that was invited to the White House under this administration was Benjamin Netanyahu. If you watch, Benjamin Netanyahu was the very first. It's so different than the administrations, some of the administrations before, both Barack Obama and Biden, who I think it was Barack Obama that brought him in through the servants' entrance and had him leave through the servants' entrance at the White House. Not the front, no big thing, not the whole cabinet before him. And when he got to, they gave that press release. So completely different. That's good as we are Bible prophecies, because we know that the Lord said, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. We also are going to talk about today a little bit about there are still, the world is crying for a two-state solution. But having seen the war that was before Israel, we know that that's really not an option because, and we're going to go into history a little bit today. So let's start with that. There is an article, and this is AP News. This is taking the side, so I'm going to read it as it's written. But you all know probably that this takes the slant of probably a pro-Palestinian state, and yet still there's some history in here to glean out of that, which is kind of interesting as we follow where we're at, why we're there, what lies before us, and then we'll, of course, tie in Bible prophecy to it. But the article is entitled, "The Gaza Strip Has Long Been a Powder Keg." Here's a look at the history of the embattled region. And like I said, it's just February 5th. It was written, an article in AP News. It says, Gaza has long been a powder keg, and it exploded after Hamas fighters stormed southern Israel on October 7th, 2023, and began killing and abducting people, sparking a crushing Israeli military operation that's only recently stopped under a tenacious ceasefire. U.S. President Donald Trump's suggestion Tuesday that displaced Palestinians in Gaza be permanently resettled outside the war-torn territory and the U.S. take, quote-unquote, ownership of the land is triggering new tensions over the future of the enclave. It says, while owning land is a term that appears to be more applicable to real estate than to territories, the Palestinians see the Gaza Strip as an integral part of their future state, even if the rulers have changed over decades. Palestinian statehood on land that would include Gaza Strip has broad international support, which is true because if you're watching some of the kickback from that, it's that Europe, throughout all the Arab nations, they're all saying, no, 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 we still have to have this. But here's a look at troubled modern history of the Gaza Strip. Here we go. So in 1948, we know that was when they were brought back into the land. And it says, before the war surrounding Israel's establishment in 1948, present-day Gaza was part of a large swath of Middle East under British colonial rule. After Israel defeated the coalition of Arab states, the Egyptian army was left in control of a small strip of land wedged between Israel and Egypt and the Mediterranean. So that was kind of early settling as Israel first came in. Then the 1967, the Six-Day War happened. So 67 to 93, Israel seizes control. Now they had actually taken all the way up to Damascus. And they gave some of that back for peace, right? So they were attacked. They didn't start that war, but they won that war. And they took it all the way to there, and then they had to back down. But it says Israel seized control of Gaza from Egypt during the 1967 Middle East War, when it also captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem, areas that remain under Israeli control. The internationally recognized Palestinian Authority, of course, internationally recognized because, see, you can tell the slant of the author, but nevertheless because they say so, but which administers semi-autonomous areas of the occupied West Bank, seeks all three areas for a hoped future state. So the spotted, broken apart Israel is what they want. They really don't even want that. They want from the river to the sea, as everybody was claiming with their with their signs and everything. So from the river to the sea takes all of Israel, and that's really what they want. But, so keep that in mind as I keep reading. Israel built more than 20 Jewish settlements in Gaza during this period. It also signed a peace treaty with Egypt at Camp David, a pact negotiated by U.S. President Jimmy Carter, which a lot more could be said about him and his presidency, but we'll stop there. In 1993, 2005 to 2005, it says the Palestinian Authority takes charge. It says, for the first time, promising peace talks between Israeli and Palestinian leaders made the future of Gaza look somewhat hopeful, right? We'll get to this, I guess it says it here. Following the Oslo Accords, a set of agreements between Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestinian Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat had laid the groundwork for a two-state solution. Control of Gaza was handed to a fledgling Palestinian Authority. I remember in 1983, all of a sudden, this particular term broke out throughout the news, and Yasser Arafat was saying, peace and safety, peace and safety. We recognize Israel's right to peace and safety. Well, the Bible says when they say peace and safety, watch out for then sudden destruction comes upon them. And I was freaking out when this was, I'm going, just digging into my Bible, going, they're saying the actual words that, and sure enough, those terms have stayed throughout the politicians since then, since 1983, that they've been saying this. But if you remember, when he got home, all the people, he couldn't follow through with things because all his people were mad that he had vocalized some sort of peace, right? They didn't want that. It says, but the optimism was short-lived. A series of Palestinian suicide attacks by Hamas militants, the 1995 assassination of Rabin by, it says, a Jewish ultra-nationalist opposed to peacemaking, and the election of Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister, so you can see how long he's been in and out of politics in Israel. Long time. Not always holding that seat as prime minister, but he's had it off and on. As prime minister, the following year, all hindered U.S.-led peace efforts. Another peace push collapsed in late 2000 when the eruption of the Second Palestinian Uprising. The uprising fizzled in 2005. Then Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon led a unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. Remember, they had settled in that area, and it says, uprooting all of Israel's troops and roughly 9,000 settlers in a move that bitterly divided Israel. So they had to take them out of nice homes. If you saw in the previous picture, down there were nice homes in that area. That all got taken over. The farming that they had there, everything taken over and basically turned to waste. Which is really, because they didn't want to live in a Jewish home because they hate them that bad that they would just burn it down or knock it down, or it's just not treated well. So anyway, it said, let's see, so we just did that one. So then 2005 to 2023, really all the way till now, right? It says, just months after Israel's withdrawal, Hamas won parliamentary elections. So how that happened, was it fair elections? That's another thing. Over Fatah, it says. So the long dominant Palestinian political party. So they had lost, the one that was the PLO and all that, and Hamas rises up. It says the following year, after months of infighting, Hamas violently seized control of Gaza from the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority. Though previous wars and countless smaller battles with Israel that devastated Gaza, Hamas has only grown more powerful. In each subsequent conflict, Hamas has had more rockets that have traveled further. The group has displayed a growing array of weapons. Its top leaders survived and ceasefires were secured. It built a government, including a police force, ministries, and broader terminals equipped with metal detectors and passport control. It wasn't really. It's a terrorist-led political state, if you will. There has not been another, if you will, election either since then, so they have held control all the way until this present war. So now, 2023, October 7th. It says Hamas attack killed some 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and saw around 250 people taken hostage. About 80 hostages remain in Gaza. 3 more were released just this last week, not looking very good, after a week-long ceasefire in November 2023. Releases under the recently negotiated Israel-Hamas ceasefire and the recovery of dead and alive hostages by Israeli military during operations in Gaza. So we know that. We've been following that. We've been watching that. That's kind of what's happened with that land. So my question is, governments from around, including the United States, have been sending money to that little piece of land, smaller than Israel, if you will, for years. And here's an article. This is from the Times of Israel, and this is back in 2021 that this was. So we've had several years since then where more money has been flooding in, especially during this time, right, for humanitarian aid and other things. But it says, where do the billions of dollars in foreign aid to Gaza really go? From 2014 to 2020, UN agencies spent to $4.5 billion in the Strip, including $600 million in 2020 alone. Remember, this was written in 21. It says, so from 2014 to 2020, UN agencies spent nearly $4.5 billion in Gaza, the 620, so it just repeats itself there. More than 80% of that funding is channeled through the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, who make up 3/4 of Gaza population. Qatar has provided $1.3 billion in aid to Gaza since 2012 for construction, health services, and agriculture. The Palestinian Authority says it will spend $1.7 billion on Gaza this year. That was in probably 2022. Maybe, because this was written at the end of 2021. Mainly on salaries for tens of thousands of civil servants who stopped working when Hamas took over in 2007. It says Germany and other European countries have spent nearly 70 million euros, $80 million, on water projects in Gaza this year. So that was in 2021, in addition to their contributions to the UN RWA. The U.S. has spent $5.5 million in Gaza that year of 2021 on cash assistance and health care, in addition to contributing $90 million to UNRWA operations in Gaza and the West Bank. Israel is granting work permits. So this was back then. These work permits is what allowed some of the people to come in and do those terrorist activities during the October 7th attack. And he says Israel is granting work permits to 10,000 Gazians who undergo security vetting, providing a crucial source of income for families with no known connection to Hamas. So supposedly they didn't have any connection to Hamas. The problem is it seems like everybody has a connection to Hamas. So they found out. So here's the strip. This is what they're talking about. If you notice on the one which the tunnels that came out, right? So they had, this was a year ago, July 17th, 33 tunnels uncovered by the IDF since then, and about half of them were destroyed. They had tunnels everywhere. So where was that money going? It was going into weapons, and it was going into terror charges under the city for attacks. See all these secret tunnels going into Israel against Israel. So the entire funding wasn't going to help their people to build better cities, to build better communities, to make them safer, to feed them. It was going to military actions to prepare for ultimately the utter destruction of Israel. That's the truth of the matter. But, I mean, some people might debate me on that, but look where the money went, right? That's kind of what that article said. Yes?
And then the U.S. aid that was just...
Yeah, USAID.
That was just dissolved.
Yes.
In the United States.
That's worth an applause.
A lot of money going to provide a concrete factory in Gaza. And guess where all that concrete?
That's right. That's where all the concrete went. Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. So U.S. aid provided a concrete factory for Gaza. And where was it going? It wasn't going to build new above-ground structures, but underground tunnels for terrorism. So that's not good. Anyway, so you get kind of an idea with the pictures there. You also notice in that first picture, or the one on the right in the class, is they have that Rafah crossing from Egypt. They believe a lot of arms and stuff came through that one. Then we have some Israeli crossings in which they generally provided aid for them. So Israel was providing a lot of aid, as said that article from December of 2021. Just so you get the picture, because right now, with Trump saying we're going to take over, which doesn't necessarily mean that we as the United States are going to own that swath of land, but certainly it needs to be rebuilt. They're saying, I've heard everywhere, the best option is just to clear the area is 5 years to get ready to build, and I've heard as long as 25 years to rebuild in that area. That's something. Because if you look at the pictures, it's pretty bad. But look at all the Arab nations. Nobody, not one other Arab nation says we will take these Palestinians into our state. Why? Now, you say Jordan. Well, what about Jordan's near, right? Or Egypt. They took Syrians in, but they will not take. So what does that tell you about those people and how that will disrupt them? The other thing is, if you flip the script on that, is they know that's the thorn inside in Israel. It's their wedge to see Israel go away, right? Because if you keep someone in the land, then that's going to make it hard on Israel, and they're okay with that. So.
The reason that Jordan is so adamant about not taking in Palestinians
Yes.
is because they did have Palestinians who were living in Jordan, and the Palestinians there tried to
Overturn their government. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting scenario when you look at the people that are saying, no, two-state solution, but they won't even help the people. Like, for example, the best thing is that people can't live in those buildings in their destructed state. I mean, there's still underground tunnels. They say there may even be some 2,000-pound bombs in some of those places that have not gone off that they're going to have to find and clear out. So you can't be living in normal until you've done that, which means that I think he actually had it right. It's very interesting to hear someone say something that no one else has said before, but that is, it can be a beautiful place, but it needs to we need to start all over with it. So move all the people out, fix it. There's actually a term that they're using that I've not seen on the news. I think it's B-E-T. Anyway, the T, the last of it was then transition to them back after they fix it. So it's like build, I don't remember what E is, and then T is a term that I haven't seen the U.S. government use, but from some Israeli interviews I've seen that come up. So anyway, kind of interesting. Did I see? Yeah, Nancy.
What about all these Palestinian kids that are coming over to college here and turning our kids over?
Yeah, right. Somebody's preparing signs and leading and telling people that this is we're the true victims. So yeah, I know it's interesting, but we're in cleanup mode. It feels like in the United States. So maybe we'll see some good out of that. So that's just interesting. Just to let you know about that little piece of blue land there on the map, right? Is first off, all these other nations, God made a promise. The Lord made a promise to Ishmael. And this is what he said in Genesis 6:12. He says, he shall be a wild man. So you tell me if this fits largely the offspring that is therein. It says, his hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Well, there's a lot of brethren there. They're dwelling in that presence. And you know what their own religious teaching says is you make friends with your enemy until you can overtake them. Then you overtake them. They want Sharia law everywhere. It's that way or no way. There is no freedom of religion within that. So anyway, here's another verse. This one's about why, who it was given to and why it's eternal for the Jewish people. So it says to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob I added there, but the Lord said, because you'll see that when we get through these verses. The first part of Genesis chapter 12, verse 7 says, then the Lord appeared to Abram, not yet his name changed to Abraham by the Lord, and said, to your descendants I will give this land. Then in Genesis 15:18, he said, on the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. I will show you what that looks like on a map here in just a minute. And then it says, also I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. It is God's giving. It is God's land. Then finally, he says this to Jacob in Genesis 28:13. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, this is the Jacob's ladder situation, and it said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac, and the land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. This is a promise, unconditional covenant. We have other places throughout. I just threw a few of the verses out, but they're throughout the Bible that this is their land. So who am I to argue with God, right? And that's one of our problems, is sometimes we tend to not like what God says because for whatever reason we're thinking this isn't fair or that isn't fair, but it doesn't matter. It's God's land. He said it, so okay, I yield, right? And that's what he wants us to do, is yield to him. Some of the things he tells us to do is to see if we'll yield to him. You know, I think of, is it Barak on his trusty donkey as he's going out to defy what the Lord had told him to do. And this donkey stops and he hits him and crushes his leg, and he hits him and completely just falls down and lays down. And then the Lord opened his eyes, and the angel of the Lord was standing before him. He said, why are you going against this? Okay, go, but you can only say what I have told you to say. We're going to talk about the angel of the Lord today in our study. Then I have this from Zechariah chapter 12. So we're going to get there when we get to chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut into pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Ultimately, we know in the book of Tribulation, it says all the nations are going to be gathered against it. There in the valley of Megiddo, right? Armageddon is where we get that from. The Lord will return, and he'll return on his white horse with a robe drenched in blood. And we're going to see him today also, I believe, in our study. Hopefully we get that. Yeah, we'll get to that. And so this is what's going to happen. So we know this day is coming, and we get to talk about that as we go further in our study. So this is the swath of land that Israel is actually promised. Much, much bigger than they currently have. They'll be divided up by tribes in certain areas. Evidently, borders matter to the Lord because he gave them borders in which he will place them in the land. And we have borders for the United States, though we hadn't been honoring them for a long time. But borders do seem to matter to try to keep, well, when we were one nation under God, I still pray that we are one nation under God, right? That we say... that we keep those truths that we know to be given out, you know, to and live by the people that are honoring the Lord. So anyway, there's Jerusalem there, and the Wailing Wall you see in the picture. I got a couple more verses for you. This is from Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 10. So this has to do with where we're headed in Israel, because one of the things that our president and the prime minister of Israel had said or are looking for is certainly they're looking for peace. And we know that before the Ezekiel 38 happens, it says that they will have some sort of peace. This isn't, I don't think, the ultimate peace. This is because war's going to happen. Well, when Jesus comes, that's it, right? He puts an end to all of that. Says, take your weapons and make them into plowshares and all that stuff. So here we go, swords into plowshares. It says, thus says the Lord. This is Ezekiel 38, 10 through 12. The Lord God, on that day it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan. It says, you will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. Now, you could argue that Israel, they have a few big walls in their town, that maybe it's not the small walled cities of the old days. And you could also argue that with modern transportation and being able to fly in and out of that maybe that represents unwalled. But nevertheless, let's keep reading here. Unwalled villages, I will go to a peaceful people. Can't say that right now, right? They are not in peace. who dwell safely. Nah, they probably don't have that right now. All of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. To take plunder, to take booty. Why will they come against them? Now, depending on what comes up this week, we may add to this because the booty part is very big. And there's one thing, actually Brian and I were talking about this. Ben Gurion Canal is in the talks. You can go back a couple years and find some news articles talking about that. A way to gap the Suez Canal and the Red Sea so they don't have to come down. They could come across into the Mediterranean. We'll look at that perhaps next week. We'll see. Just as another way that would add more great wealth to Israel. So kind of interesting in what could happen because that canal would exit through what is now the Gaza Strip, or at least the north part, or maybe the middle of, depending on the maps that you see. Anyway, I don't know what the engineering would take on that either. And it might not have anything to do with anything, but it's a curious thought. Anyway, it's going to take booty to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited. Now that part is fulfilled. I mean, as far as they're inhabited now, in 48 when they came in, it was a wasteland. All you have to do is go back and read some of the previous writings of people that had traversed the area and said nothing can live here. This is terrible. Anyway, it says, and against a people gathered from the nations. And certainly they're still coming back to Israel still even today. Even in the midst of the war, they gained population of people moving back there. Pretty amazing. Who have acquired livestock and goods to dwell in the midst of the land. So we're not there yet. That's what we're watching for now. What's going to happen to create this for an Ezekiel 38 war? We don't have to be there for that peace to come out. There's nothing in the Bible, there's nothing that says that the rapture of the church, the end of this church age, can't come way before this gets set up. But we're watching it because as we see it get close to being set up, then we know the return of our Lord could come. He could also come after this war. There's nothing that says. There's no set time thing for when the Lord said he'll come. He'll come as a thief in the night, if you will. So then I have this. In Thessalonians chapter 1, or 1 Thessalonians, chapter 5, verse 3, it says, for when they say, and this is the verse that I quoted to you just a minute ago, peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. So this is one of those key terms that always makes my ears perk up when in the Middle East and around Israel they start talking peace and safety. How does that happen? When does this moment come? Then I have one more from Isaiah. Chapter 9, verse 6 and 7. It says, we all do this at Christmas time, but it says, for unto us, isn't fully fulfilled. You'll see it. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. That is when he comes back, second coming, when he sets up his kingdom on earth. That is not yet, because the government's not on his shoulder right now, if you will. It's still overrun, but guess what? During the millennial reign, Satan will be locked up for the 1,000 years. The Lord will actually rule and reign. We're going to get into that too. That's going to tie into our Zechariah study. Okay, a lot kind of tied into there. But just based on watching that news conference with Benjamin Netanyahu and our President Trump, you can see where that was a big shift. No one had said some of those things. So all of a sudden we shifted. So can you see how maybe something could happen that could create some pseudo peace? Perhaps in a different way. Because right now we know Hamas and Hezbollah aren't in love with any idea of ever leaving where they're at. Yes?
At first when Trump said that America would take over Gaza,
Yeah.
I thought, well, that's very arrogant and rash.
Yeah.
And against kind of what God says about taking
Right.
over his land. But the more I thought about it, I think, this is my opinion, I think that it was a smart move because it takes the pressure off of Israel and puts it on the United States, who is much more firepower, but I don't know.
Right.
And so if they're going to come against us, take it forever.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think he wants to build it up and then, and make some money. But it would be nice.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
Why not? If we're gonna be putting that much money in there,
Yeah.
so I think it was a good move.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's different. When you first heard it, yeah, it sounds a little bit like, and that's the other thing is we have to remember about this current president, because we've seen him before, is that he says stuff sometimes so brash to just shake up the conversation. And so the conversation has been shaken, and we'll see where it ends up landing, right? And that's what you do when you negotiate anyway. You ask for the moon, and then you come back to whatever that is.